China's family planning policies forced many parents to hide their children. This resulted in a whole generation of illegal children who were shut out of society. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Now, most people have heard of China's disastrous one-child policy. It was started in the 1970s to limit births in China, and it did through huge fines, forced abortions, forced sterilizations, and even forced adoptions. It's the Chinese Communist Party. They're good at using force. Well, birth rates fell so dramatically that China became a victim of its own success. People are calling this a demographic crisis because there's not enough young people to support China's aging population. When the Chinese Communist Party started to realize their mistake, they changed the one-child policy to a two-child policy in 2016. But that didn't do much to raise the birth rate. So in 2021, China rolled out a three-child policy, although there's actually no penalty for violating the policy. So it's basically like the government saying, keep it to three or we'll shake our finger at you. But considering China executes more prisoners than any country on earth, I'm sure citizens hear that and think, it's a trap. But under both the one-child policy and the two-child policy, children that were born outside the policy were also born outside the legal system. Without a birth certificate or household registration, these kids were left without any official identity. It's basically like being an illegal immigrant, but in your own country. Last year, China found close to 12 million children that it didn't know existed. China has so many kids that they lost count. Even Nick Cannon is like, I would never do that to my 9 babies. Or is it 11? Maybe 22. China undercounted the number of children born in 2000 to 2010 by at least 11.6 million, equivalent to Belgium's current population, partly because of its stringent one-child policy. Just to be clear, these were children whose parents tried to hide them from authorities so they could be kept alive. Because again, the consequences of violating the one-child policy could range from crippling fines to forced abortions, or even having your kids kidnapped by local governments so they could give them up for adoption by wealthy foreigners who would make a generous donation to the local government. After the 2010 census, official statistics put the number of illegal or hidden children at 13 million. Although according to the European Network of Statelessness, the true number was probably closer to 30 million. Even Peter Pan has a better idea of how many lost boys there are. How does Never Neverland have a more complete census than China? One census official said that most of these children were born outside the country's one-child policy. However, there could be other reasons for people trying to hide their children. There are an estimated 20,000 to 30,000 children of North Korean mothers who aren't legal citizens in China. North Korean women who escape to China are often sold by human traffickers as brides to Chinese men. So they flee one oppressive regime just to wind up in another. That's like escaping from Silent Hill only to wind up in Dracula's castle. How are these two neighbors? Because they're not allowed to leave North Korea, they often don't have passports or any form of ID. And even if they did, China has been known to force refugees to return to North Korea, so they probably wouldn't register with the state anyway. Even though technically, if one parent is a Chinese national, the child could get citizenship, but Chinese fathers reportedly sometimes did not register their children to avoid exposing the illegal status of their North Korean partners. Another reason for illegal children in China is unwed mothers. It is nearly impossible to register a newborn baby without a marriage certificate. This means children born out of wedlock frequently fall into the same category as second children under the one-child policy. The children are given no legal rights just because their parents aren't married? Is this China or Westeros from Game of Thrones? Poor Jon Snow wouldn't do any better being born here. That supposedly changed in 2016 when all children were granted equal rights, irrespective of family planning and other policy limits. However, there is limited information to show that, and some sources suggest that unregistered children still have difficulties accessing public services. Once again, it's a trap. And after the break, I'll tell you why it's such a big problem. Welcome back. China has admitted it has at least 13 million undocumented children, although instead of calling them undocumented, they're often referred to as black children. They're called black children because the state has no information about them. When children are born, most parents get a birth certificate, which can be used to apply for a hukou, or household registration. It's a tiered system. You get either an urban hukou or a rural hukou. And you're technically not allowed to live or work outside your hukou area unless you get a migrant permit. That means poorer people from the countryside have a hard time moving to cities to get jobs. Communism, where everyone is treated equally. But even if having a rural hukou sucks, it's actually much worse to not have one at all. That's because you need them for almost everything, like to register for school, get government health care, apply for a job, get married, take public transportation, or get a passport. You know, basically anything that would allow you to be part of society. It's kind of like a social security number. If you needed a social security number to take a train. If a child was born outside the one or two child policy, parents would have to pay what's called a social maintenance fee. That's the fine for violating the policy. And it can often be many times more than what the parents make in a year. If parents couldn't or wouldn't pay the fee, the hukou was withheld as punishment. As you can imagine, not being able to go to school or access medical care put these kids at a pretty big disadvantage.
I think I'm really different to other people my age. My life is totally different to theirs. They have an identity. They can go to school, have friends, teachers. Me, I have nothing.
How depressing. Sounds like China is creating an entire generation of emo kids. Do you want bad poetry and a national shortage of eyeliner, China? Because this is how you get it. The Chinese government has tried to course correct because of the obviously disastrous consequences of having so many people living outside the system. In 2015, they announced that they would allow undocumented children to apply for hukou. But for a whole generation of kids like Li Shui, it's too late. They can't recover those missed years. One study found nearly half of unregistered Chinese citizens were illiterate or had no formal education.
Experts warn discrimination suffered by so-called black children could end up threatening society.
If the government continues to punish them and not give them identity cards, the black children may resort to crime. They may become burglars, thieves, and murderers.
Somewhere, a progressive on Twitter is saying, "How dare you imply that black children would resort to crime?" Wait, what do you mean a different type of black? Oh, never mind, I guess. That wouldn't be good, but looking at the silver lining, at least these kids won't grow up to be communist officials enforcing insane policies. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a fan of the show who supports us through the crowdfunding website Patreon or the exclusive social media site Locals. Ace Ventura asks on Locals, if the campaign for the Chinese people to have more children is successful, whether it's by encouragement or coercion, will it be enough to stop the population collapse? Or is it already inevitable? Well, Ace, so far the campaign to have more children has not been successful. In 2021, China's population growth hit a new low. And that's according to official data. Some analysts have said that China's population is already shrinking. And the birth rate is still falling. For some reason, China's zero-COVID policy doesn't seem to be encouraging people to have babies. At this point, it doesn't seem like China can turn things around fast enough to stop a demographic decline. The biggest issue is not having enough workers to support the elderly population. There is one thing the Chinese authorities could do to gain workers quickly: allow more immigration. But again, zero COVID is having the opposite effect. Thanks for your question, Ace Ventura, and thanks for supporting the show on Locals. And if you're not a supporter already, join us on Locals. For a small monthly contribution, you can chat directly with me, Matt, and Shelley, and with other China Uncensored fans in our own censorship-free social media space. You'll also get other cool perks, including the ability to ask me a question I can answer on the show. The link is below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.